We are wired to believe what we hear, especially when we want to believe it. It's human. The longing to trust, to connect, to feel safe in someone's words. And so we listen. We hear promises, apologies, plans for a better future, and we want to believe them. We want to hold on to hope that someone means what they say, that their intentions are pure, that their love or friendship, or the rock or partnership is honest. But the truth is, if we want to understand someone's true intentions, we can't look to what they say. The gray rock, we have to look to what they do, because actions aren't just reflections of character. They are confessions. They reveal what words are often trying to hide. When someone's words and actions don't line up, that is not confusion. That is clarity. That is not a gray area. That is a red flag waving right in front of you. And yet, how many times have we excused the gap? How often have we said, maybe they're just going through something, or they didn't mean it like that, or they said they'd change. And how many of those times did that change never come? That pattern never break? Because here's the truth. Inconsistency is not a personality quirk. It is a communication of priority. When someone says they care about you but only shows up when it's convenient for them, that's not care, that's convenience. When someone says they'll call and they don't, says they'll try harder and they won't, says they're listening but repeatedly do the same thing, that hurts you. That gap isn't harmless. That gap is revealing the truth. We all want to give people the benefit of the doubt, especially when we care, especially when we're invested, full of the gray rock. But when you're constantly having to interpret someone's words to try and match their behavior, you're doing emotional gymnastics to hold on to something that may not be real. We don't have to guess how someone feels about us. We don't need to decode mixed signals like it's a puzzle we're meant to solve. The answers are in the actions. Always. You can tell someone you love them every day, but if your actions are cold, dismissive, controlling, or neglectful, that's not love. That's a contradiction. And contradictions in relationships are exhausting because they keep you stuck in a cycle of confusion. You're constantly searching for stability, for consistency, for something solid to hold on to. But what you're really doing is waiting for someone to become who they promised they were, waiting for someone to show up in the way they said they would, waiting for a version of the relationship that only exists in your imagination, not your reality. The gray rock, the people who have the clearest intentions, are not the ones who say all the right things. They're the ones who show up when it's hard. The gold, the gray rock, they're the ones who follow through when no one's watching. They're the ones who do what they said they'd do, even when it's inconvenient, because that's integrity, that's alignment. And when someone is aligned, when their actions support their words, you don't feel anxious around them. You don't second guess. You don't wonder where you stand. You feel safe. We've been taught to value words. Eloquence, charm, articulation, but none of that means anything without action. The most manipulative people in the world know exactly what to say. They know how to disarm you, how to the gray rock, how to flatter you, how to tell you what you want to hear. But if you really want to see someone's character, stop listening for a moment. Watch what they do when they think it won't be noticed. Pay attention to how they behave when you set a boundary, or when you say no to the gray rock, or when they're not getting what they want. Because those are the moments when their intentions are no longer dressed up in language. The rock, those are the moments when the mask slips. I'm not saying don't listen. I'm saying don't stop at listening. Let people speak. But also let them show you, because the people who truly respect you will not expect you to keep accepting their contradictions. They will take accountability. They will match their words with action. They will know that promises are only meaningful when kept. And if someone keeps showing you, through repeated inconsistency, that their words are unreliable, believe them. Believe what they do, not what they say. Don't rewrite their story with your hope. Don't paint their behavior with a softer brush just because you want it to look like love. Love doesn't require you to compromise your peace. It doesn't live in confusion. It doesn't hide behind mixed messages. Love is clear. Consistency is clear. Truth is always clear. The hardest part is not seeing the red flag. It's admitting what it means, because that admission requires us to face disappointment. It requires us to face what we've been avoiding. But you deserve relationships where there is no need to constantly translate or justify someone's actions. You deserve to be in connection with people who make you feel secure, not constantly unsure. And when you start expecting that, not from a place of perfection, but from a place of self-respect, you begin to see that clarity is kindness and inconsistency is not. So if you're wondering what someone's true intentions are, stop asking them. Start watching them. The truth is already there. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who are cold, distant, or obviously cruel. They're the ones who make you feel like the center of the universe, right up until they don't. They're the ones who pour on the charm, who compliment you endlessly, who seem to know exactly what to say to make you feel special, seen, even chosen. And it feels good. It feels intoxicating. But here's the thing about excessive charm. It's not always genuine. Sometimes it's a performance. Sometimes it's a carefully curated tool used to disarm you, to win your trust quickly so they can bypass the slower, more honest work of truly connecting. There's a difference between real connection and artificial closeness. Real connection builds slowly. It comes with curiosity, with consistency, with the willingness to show up over time and earn trust. But artificial closeness is fast. It skips the steps. It feels like someone's already inside your walls before you even know how they got there. And in the beginning, that can feel flattering, like destiny, like magic. But what it really is a shortcut. And people who need shortcuts often don't want connection. They want control. When someone is overly charming but lacks emotional depth, it's a red flag. It means they might be more invested in how they appear than in who they actually are. Charm is about image. And when it's not backed by substance, when it's not grounded in vulnerability, empathy, or accountability, it's hollow. And hollow relationships leave you feeling confused. You feel wanted but not known, seen but not understood, adored but not safe. It's easy to fall for charm, especially when you're craving affection or attention. But if someone showers you with praise and then disappears when you need support, that's not connection. That's convenience. If someone makes you feel like royalty in public but won't have an honest conversation with you in private, that's not love. That's performance. What makes a person trustworthy isn't how well they flatter you. It's how they show up when you're not at your best. It's how they respond when you express a need. It's how willing they are to be uncomfortable for the sake of truth, instead of comfortable for the sake of control. Charm might open a door, but it won't keep it open. Only character can do that. So when someone's attention feels too good to be true, slow down. Ask yourself, are they really interested in me? Or are they interested in how I make them feel? Do they show up when it's not easy? Do they listen more than they talk? Are they consistent in who they are of the gray rock, not just when they're trying to impress me, but when there's nothing in it for them? Because true connection doesn't need to dazzle. It just needs to be real. One of the clearest of signs of true intentions is how they respond to your boundaries. Because boundaries aren't walls meant to shut people out. They're bridges meant to teach people how to meet you with care. They are expressions of self-worth, not rejection. And yet, for some people, boundaries feel like threats. Not because your boundaries are wrong or too much, but because your strength makes their control harder to maintain. When someone repeatedly disregards or pushes your boundaries, even in subtle, gray rock, quiet ways, that's not forgetfulness, that's a pattern. It's not just about that one time they joked about something you asked them not to, or the time they showed up uninvited, even after you told them you needed space. It's about the message beneath those moments, the The goal, your comfort doesn't matter as much as my preference, and that's a message we cannot afford to ignore. Sometimes it doesn't look obvious. It can sound like, you're being too sensitive, or I didn't think it was a big deal, or relax, I was just playing. These aren't just words. They're strategies. Strategies to minimize your feelings, dismiss your needs, and make you question your right to protect your own peace. The people who consistently ignore your limits don't want to get closer to you. They want to have power over how you show up in the relationship. They want to make you smaller so that they can feel bigger. And here's what's even more important. It doesn't have to be loud to be damaging. Boundary violations aren't always explosive. Sometimes they're quiet and persistent, just enough to wear you down over time. You stop speaking up. You start doubting yourself. You tell yourself it's not worth the conflict, but that silence doesn't bring peace. It brings resentment. It brings disconnection, and it begins to chip away at the most important relationship you have, the one with yourself. You see, honoring your own boundaries is not selfish, it's responsible. Because if you keep betraying yourself to keep someone else comfortable, that's not love, that's abandonment, self-abandonment. And it doesn't matter how kind they are afterward, how apologetic, how sweet the apology sounds. If there's no change in behavior, then the apology was just a pause, not a shift. True respect is shown when someone listens the first time you say no, when they don't need you to justify, explain, or perform pain in order for your limit to be honored. When they meet your boundary not with resistance, but goal with reflection, that's when you know their intentions are rooted in respect, not control. And those are the people who belong close to you. Not the ones who only listen when forced to, but the ones who choose to because they value your well-being as much as their own. How your boundaries are not up for negotiation with someone who refuses to treat them with care. And you don't owe access to someone who proves, through word or action, that they cannot be trusted with it. Love doesn't test your boundaries. The goal of the gray rock, real connection, to ask you to shrink. Anyone who continually crosses the lines you've drawn is telling you who they are, and you should believe them the first time. One of the clearest flags that reveals someone's true intentions is their inability or unwillingness to take responsibility. You can see it in how they explain their past. Every failure, someone else's fault, every conflict, always the other person, every broken relationship. Never their doing. It's always the ex who was toxic, the boss who was unfair, the friends who were jealous. At first, you might not even catch it. It might sound reasonable because they're charming, because the story is told well, because part of you wants to believe them. But listen carefully. If they're never at the center of their own accountability, that's not just a red flag. That's a pattern, and patterns don't lie. It's easy to blame. It's much harder to reflect. And reflection, real honest reflection, takes courage. It takes humility. It takes a willingness to look at the messes we've made and say, that was me. I did that. I hurt someone. I need to change. And people who avoid that kind of responsibility aren't just avoiding guilt. They're avoiding growth. They're choosing comfort over integrity. And that choice, repeated over time, always costs the people around them the grok. Because when someone can't take responsibility, what they're really saying is I'm not going to protect this relationship from my own flaws. And that's dangerous because we all mess up. We all say the wrong thing. We all fall short. But what matters is what happens next. Do we lean in and own it? Or do we dodge, deflect, defend? When someone refuses to take ownership, they turn their mistakes into weapons. Instead of repairing, they gaslight. Instead of apologizing, they accuse. And if you're on the other side of that pattern long enough, you begin to internalize the blame. You start asking, maybe it really was my fault. The goal of the gray rock did, maybe I overreacted, maybe I was too emotional. And little by little, you stop trusting yourself. That's the real cost of being in a connection with someone who won't take responsibility. Your own voice starts to dim. People who genuinely care about you want to understand how their actions impact you. They don't get defensive every time you bring up something that hurt. They don't turn every conversation into a courtroom. They don't need to win. They want to repair. And you can feel that difference. It's in how they listen. It's in how they pause instead of retaliating. It's in how they say, "You're right. I need to do better." That's accountability, and that's a sign of integrity. And here's the true thing. Someone who always sees themselves as the victim is not emotionally safe. Because when everything is always happening to them, they take no ownership what they're doing to others. They might appear sensitive. They might appear misunderstood. But what they're actually doing is refusing to evolve. And when someone refuses to evolve, the people closest to them are doing all the emotional labor. You become the one who over-explains, who fixes, who smooths things over, who takes responsibility for both of you. That's not love. That's imbalance. And imbalance is unsustainable. You don't need perfect people in your life. You need accountable ones, people who can say, "I got that wrong. I go to the gray rock. I didn't handle that well. I want to learn how to do better." People who aren't afraid to own their part because they know that accountability doesn't make them weak. It makes them trustworthy. People who understand that growth doesn't come from avoiding discomfort. It comes from walking through it with open eyes and an open heart. And if someone shows you time and time again that they won't look in the mirror, that they won't own their part, the goal of the gray rock, that they'd rather blame you than be honest with themselves, believe them. That's who they are right now. And no amount of love or patience or explanation will change someone who's not willing to change themselves. Accountability is love, and the absence of it is a truth we can't afford to ignore. Sometimes it doesn't look like abuse. It doesn't come in raised voices or broken objects. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the way someone pulls away from you without warning, without explanation, just enough to make you question what you did wrong. It comes in the form of guilt in comments like, "I guess you just don't care," or "If you really loved me, you would have known." It comes wrapped in emotional withdrawal, passive, aggressive, quiet, or cold detachment, designed not to protect peace, but to punish. Because some people don't need to yell to control you. They just need to make you afraid of losing them. Control doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up in the patterns that make you feel small, confused, anxious. And what makes this kind of manipulation so dangerous is that it's easy to miss, especially when you're someone who leads with empathy, someone who always wants to fix things, someone who says, "Maybe they're just hurting," before you ask, "But what about me?" That's the trap. The constant giving, the constant guessing, the emotional weight you keep carrying, hoping that if you just get it right, maybe the love will feel safe again. Maybe they'll stop pulling away. When someone uses silence as a weapon, it's not about conflict resolution. It's about control. It's about destabilizing you just enough to make you chase after their approval. And in that dynamic, the relationship stops being about mutual care. It becomes a power play. And power plays are not love. They are rooted in fear and insecurity, in the desperate need to dominate the emotional tone of the connection. You'll find yourself walking on eggshells, trying not to trigger another shutdown. You start censoring yourself. You silence your own needs so that they don't silence you again. And guilt. It's a tool just as sharp, the kind that cuts without leaving marks, the kind that makes you feel responsible for their moods, their disappointments, their unmet needs. If you're constantly being made to feel like the bad one, like you're too demanding, too emotional, too difficult, it's time to step back and ask who benefits from that story. Because in emotionally manipulative relationships, your strength becomes a threat. Your honesty becomes a weapon used against you. And slowly, without even noticing, you begin to shrink. You stop expressing what you need. You start apologizing for simply existing too loudly. And you start thinking that if you were just a little more patient, the grok, a little less sensitive, maybe they would stop withdrawing. Maybe they'd finally see how hard you're trying. But the truth is, it's not about hard you try. It never was. It's about how willing they are to meet you in the middle. And if someone is only emotionally available when you're agreeing with them, when you're quiet, when you're small, then you're not in a relationship. The goal, you're in a cycle of appeasement, and that's not connection, that's captivity. Real love doesn't punish. It doesn't make you earn safety after conflict. It doesn't disappear when you speak the truth. Real love listens, leans in, and says, I may not agree, but I'm here. I see you. I'm not going anywhere just because we hit a hard moment. Anything less than that, anything rooted in fear or silence, is not love. It's emotional manipulation dressed up as care. And I know how hard it is to see that when you're in it, because the silence feels like tension. But you think it's just someone needing space. Though the guilt feels like disappointment, but you think you've just let them down. But here's the difference. If space leads to clarity, healing, and reconnection, it's healthy. But if space is used to punish, to scare you, to make you submit, that's Kirshen. If guilt makes you reflect and grow, that's one thing. But if guilt is used to keep you compliant, that's emotional warfare. Healthy relationships can hold tension. They can survive disagreement. They're flexible enough to bend without breaking. But manipulation needs fear to function. It needs unpredictability. It needs your self-doubt to stay alive. Because the moment you trust your gut, the moment you say, this doesn't feel like love, the control starts to lose power. You deserve relationships where your emotions are not used against you, where silence isn't a tool of punishment, but a space for peace, where guilt doesn't come attached to your needs. Rock, where the people around you don't retreat or punish or play games when you show up honestly, because that's what love is supposed to feel like. Safe, steady, clear. And when someone shows you again and again that your feelings are tools for their control, believe them. Believe that silence can be loud. Believe that guilt can be sharp. And most of all, believe that you're allowed to walk away from anything that makes you question your worth just to keep someone close. Sometimes the truth about someone's intentions isn't found in what they say. It's found in what they avoid. Watch what someone refuses to talk about. Pay attention to the moments when the conversation shifts, when their tone hardens, when you bring up something real, something honest, and suddenly you're met with deflection, irritation, or silence. When someone becomes uncomfortable every time accountability is required, every time emotional depth is asked of them, what they're showing you isn't discomfort. It's resistance. There are people who can talk endlessly about everything except what really matters. They can share stories, make you laugh, make you feel like you're in their world. But when the moment comes to talk about something deeper, to own a mistake, to admit a fault, to acknowledge hurt, they shut down, they change the subject, they minimize, or worse, they blame you for bringing it up. That avoidance isn't random. It's strategic, because people who fear emotional responsibility will always frame your honesty as an attack, your vulnerability as too much, and your truth as a burden. And when you care about someone like that, you often start doing the work for both of you. You anticipate what will set them off. You soften your words, not to communicate better, but to avoid their reaction. You hold back your needs because you know they won't meet you there. You begin editing yourself, not to grow, but to survive the connection. That's not love. That's self-protection disguised as patience. And the more you do it, the more distant you become from your own truth. Avoidance is a red flag, not because people are imperfect. We all have things we struggle to face, but because avoidance over time becomes a form of emotional abandonment. It says, I'm not willing to meet you in the hard places. I'm not willing to look at myself. I'm not willing to do the work. And if someone isn't willing to face themselves, they won't ever truly face you either. They might be physically present. They might even say they care. But emotionally, they're gone the moment things get real. People who consistently avoid difficult conversations aren't trying to protect peace. They're trying to protect their comfort. But real connection isn't built on comfort. It's built on courage. The courage to sit in discomfort. The courage to say, I was wrong. The courage to hear, you hurt me, and not collapse under shame or lash out in defense. Because love is not just soft, it's strong. It holds space for accountability, for truth, for repair. Avoidance shows up in a lot of subtle ways. Sometimes it's the person who always has an excuse. Sometimes it's the person who says, let's not dwell on the past whenever you bring up pain. Sometimes it's the one who turns every issue into a joke, who hides behind sarcasm or intellect or silence. But regardless of how it shows up, the message is always the same: I'm not going to meet you there. And what that creates is loneliness, deep, aching loneliness. Because you can be in a room with someone, share a bed with them, make a life with them, and still feel like you're completely alone if they won't engage in the work of growth. You end up carrying the emotional weight for both of you. You end up learning how to walk around the landmines. You end up doubting your right to ask for more. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. The go are allowed to want depth. You are allowed to ask for honesty. You are allowed to say, this matters, and I won't pretend it doesn't. Because anyone who truly cares for you will not run from your truth. They'll move toward it. They might not get it perfect. They might stumble, but they'll try. They'll show up. They'll listen. They'll stay. Not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. Avoidance is not protection, it's neglect, and love cannot grow where truth is constantly avoided. So if you keep finding yourself on the other side of silence, of evasion, of resistance, believe what you're being shown. Because when someone avoids accountability, they're also avoiding intimacy, and you deserve more than surface level connection. You deserve to be met fully.